Christina was talking about with the zoning text. If you have a chance and opportunity to review the zoning text and the changes that they're proposing, it's very important that you do. Understand that, I'm sorry, there's a column in the way. Understand that under the ULURP process, the changes that will be made and what ultimately Community Board 8 will be voting upon is that zoning text and that zoning change. And so, as Christina has outlined, some of the changes are pivotal and to understand. For example, the change of that district, which is currently zoned as a residential district, will be changed to a commercial district. A commercial whose density allows a certain amount of square footage and whatnot. They're asking to create that into now a special district called the Southern Roosevelt Island Development District, and it will effectively lock in the changes that they plan to make. And so all the differing allotments that within the zoning text that they're looking to do, for example, a commercial space typically allows up to, I think, and they read the statistics, and I don't remember the FAR on the top of my head, but typically will allow up to 3,000 parking spaces as a matter of right, not as a matter of as without even asking once it's been changed. They're looking to cap that to X amount of numbers. So that's why, for example, the term sheet's important when you're seeking to have them lock in X amount of spaces, because if the 500 spaces are not what the island necessarily wants for future growth and for presently, it will be necessary now at this point as it goes through the 7-month process to make sure that that is properly reflected in the zoning text change. So this brings me, I guess, to the next point and why the Community Board 8 hearings are being held and why it's important to make comments to the draft environmental impact study. First and foremost, I think that it should be said, at the meeting, our esteemed chair for Community Board 8, Nick Weiss, had made a comment when somebody asked, well, what impact does Community Board 8's statements have? And he said, well, we're an advisory committee. He didn't further explain it, and I think that it should be really impressed upon the community that we at Community Board 8 give Community Board 8, Manhattan Borough's President's Office, the City of Planning Commission, all of us give what I call the advisory opinions. And the advisory opinions are what the City Council takes into account, and any of the city planners will tell you that if they get one no or two no's, if they get two no's, then City Council nearly automatically rejects the project. If they get one no, it causes them to have hearings. And the reason why Cornell is so wants to appease the community and make sure that Community Board 8 feels that the community is on board and that they don't get a no vote is because then they won't be automatically faced to hearings. So that's why it's important that, especially at that meeting, I noted that a lot of people, after Nick had said that, everybody kind of left and said, oh, why am I even here? The reality is that it's very important that the community remain impact and provide input and understand that although Community Board 8 says it's advisory by statute, that advisory opinion plays directly into the decision that City Council makes. And that, and touching upon with our conversations with Jessica, she understands that. And that's the reason why she, in fact, is directly, as part of the negotiations with what's going on, understands that and is participating because she's taking on directly the negotiations of some of the items that are akin to, that the city itself would be able to directly ameliorate. And I'll go into that in just a second. Yeah.
Am I right to understand there are 50 members on the board?
There are 45 members.
And what kind of vote? Will you have a majority?
So it will be. So there's four types of votes they can do. They can do yes with no comment, and so somebody will put a motion forward. It will probably be one of us, either myself, Ellen, or Larry, or maybe Nick, depending on who it is. And the motions will be either recommend yes with no comments or no restrictions. Recommend yes with recommendations, meaning yes, but they have to do this. No with recommendations. No, but if they do this, then it should be a yes, which we've never understood why the statute reads that way. That why basically they're both mean the same thing, but I guess it carries different connotations. And no with no comment. No with no comment is a unanimous. See, Community Board 8 recommends. And no
so somebody who makes a motion sort of sets the frame. Yeah. How that's going to go.
And that will be the December meeting when what happens is this committee. So the the public hearings that you've all been attending or been asked to attend, that is actually the people who are sitting in the front, and you'll notice Ellen and I are sitting by them. We are actually the committee that this resolution or the resolution will come out of. And so I will tell you, and so we are listening very carefully to what the community is saying, and the responses there too. And just as an aside, and taking off, wearing my community board aide hat right now, I will say that the fact that the community came out in droves, came out very educated and being able to respond and ask educated questions, did pique and made a lot of the members on the committee, the task force, very concerned. At the end, we actually spoke privately, and many of us who are the one who will be putting forth the resolution basically said they did not respond to anything. There was nothing that was said that was not said before, and there's no clarifications that were made before. Obviously, they are required by statute to respond to the statements and questions that are made during these hearings.
They mean Cornell.
Cornell. Actually, what ends up happening is that Cornell, as part of the final process when they enter on the December 16th date, they actually produce a record in which they list all the questions and comments that were actually entered into, that were posed, and their responses thereto. And then that actually gets packaged to, packaged along to the City Planning Commission, the Manhattan Borough President's Office, and then off to City Council.
Once the motion is made, what is the criteria for whether it passes or not?
I mean, if there's recommendation, advisory recommendation.
It's
so once it comes out of committee, it goes in front of the general board, and the general board will vote. I mean, they will vote whether they agree with the motion or not with the motion.
So,
if they don't agree with the motion, somebody else will have to make a substitute motion. So let's just say we agree. So let's say, let's play this out. Let's say...
it's a mathematical question.
Yeah.
Do you have to win by one vote? Is it majority?
It's a majority.
It's a majority.
Yeah. And just going along with some of these other, just going along the other comments as well, I will say the Manhattan Borough President's Office, where this is the next stop along the process, the 7-month-long process, has been very keyed in. I have a very close relationship with Kristen Ellis, who's the direct aide with the Borough President's Office, and they are paying close attention to what we're saying here, so that if for some reason it moves along and these items are being addressed or saying they're being addressed, that when the Manhattan Borough President's Office gets it in front of them, it's just not rubber stamped through. They're actually paying attention, doing their studies. Jessica Lappin's office is also doing their own studies as well for when it gets in front of City Council. So it's the process is there, and just kind of, I guess, as counsel, I just want to make sure I reassure everyone that that's what's happening. Along the same lines, so they've asked me to kind of go on and talk about the environmental impact study. Now, Christina will pass along the website again, so you will see that there are differing sections of that divides up different sections of the study. The study is meant to be respond to the community and address directly the concerns. And a good example of it an example of it is, in my opinion, their traffic study that I actually have already made a comment to that there's to respond to. If you look at their traffic study by statute requires them to do the worst case scenario and assess what the issue may be, and if it can or cannot be mitigated, and if they propose that a mitigation will be held. Now, if you read the traffic study, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, in terms of this mitigation issue, because I think I was caught a little off guard when they identified a problem and then said not mitigated. So it's like, we know you got a problem, but we don't see a solution.
Right.
As this process goes on and they do some of this research, if we get down the road and they continue not to have a mitigation for problems, how does that get addressed and at what level? Because I think that's unacceptable.
Right.
And so at what point do we say this has to have a mitigation?
Right. Well, so this is where we are at right now. If by December 12th they don't have a mitigation plan, then the opinion the written opinion, your written comments as a community and as RICC is planning to do, needs to specifically state that, because believe it or not, that's the reason why the City Council has a large staff, because they parse through, they actually read the record, and if they see, oh, this is not mitigated, this is not mitigated, the community is objected to this. The worst case scenario is they say it's not mitigated and no comment is made on the non-mitigation. You know, because there's some items that necessarily the community does not feel they're okay with it. Right.
Okay.
And I mean, so an example of this is that the traffic study that they had rendered, worst case scenario, the way the statute is written up and the way that the environmental impact studies, the requirements that they've written up is that for them, for the purposes of the traffic study, an intersection, quote unquote intersection, has to be one in which there are more than two directions on. So a two-way stop is not an intersection; it's a three-way intersection, right? That or more. So of course, when you look at their study, they only identify two intersections on Roosevelt Island, right? They only invite one at the bottom of the helix, and then they also identify as potential. I think it was a potential intersection was the roundabout. Because of the problem that came up is that
the roundabout at the tram or the roundabout at Black House.
Yeah. And right, I don't think they actually identified that as an intersection, which is a good point. So the impact study, therefore, they felt said two intersections, understand will be impacted, but it's only two intersections. And we don't see we will be able to mitigate it by NYPD traffic, cops, and whatnot.
Are there comparable case studies that we can find to say that you're using a standard that's not relevant for us, but this standard is one that is acceptable?
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, in the study for the traffic study, they used Manhattanville, the Columbia expansion, as their. But one of the things that, like Jeff pointed out, their whole they have about 80 pages of issues, and then they have about like a couple of paragraphs of mitigation, which is mostly signals, putting a light at the helix, having some change in traffic rules, which I don't know how much you could change it or how many signs you could put, maybe telling people not to drive there during certain periods. And so, they really kind of have, they one of the things that I found sort of unusual is one of the major issues that they pointed out in that study was that if they did the changes that they were going to do, that the only thing that would be really affected would be the Q102 bus in some circumstances. And they kind of glossed over the red bus completely, as that's not really much of an issue. Which we all know is, it's a huge issue.
They must have missed one.
No, so I was going to say, so when actually Community Board 8 actually was able to render some of their comments, and a large part of the members have left, I mean, because this is kind of, we were rushing to get our comments in, one of the comments I did enter was that they have to go back and redo their study because it fails to identify the spinal characteristic of the island, that's actually only a two-way street, and that the times of construction directly, in which they do not address, directly conflict with the school zone, for example.
While we're on parking, just so that we can appreciate the growth, if there is any, 500 spaces for parking compares to what at Goldwater during its active phase?
Oh, okay. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone knows.
I'll find out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good...
Because one thing to have construction being trucked in, it's another thing for permanently increasing things by a large percent, where Main Street isn't what it was supposed to be already.
Right. I mean, if I can just, let me do this. If I can just finish off this quick segment, and then, because I do think the board members do want to have an active discussion with you all, so just let me impress upon you here some further statements, and then maybe then we can continue on. So, having said that, I brought that up as an example of how important the draft environmental impact study is in this process, because it's a living document that will continue on throughout until it reaches City Council. And the board members themselves have started dividing up the differing sections and doing their own individual assessments and reviews. And so what Christina is going to be covering next is to help in the division and pulling in the talent of the members of the community to help this process along, and so that there can be a unified and make sure that we have a fully vetted document that's been fully commented on.
Okay, great.